that just said to me things like, I've been in the public service for 20 years and I've never ever until now felt confident and comfortable to come out. And now I can.
Welcome everyone to episode 3 of the Impact Policy Podcast. Today I'm joined by all-round legend, CEO and founder of Spark & Co, Zoé Kennedy. I've had the privilege of working alongside her for a few different projects over the past years, and it's absolutely awesome to be able to sit down, talk all things purpose, passion, what she's doing now, and a bit of a deep dive into some of the D&I and employee network space. So thank you so much, Zoe, for sitting here and giving up your time to have a bit of a yarn.
Thank you for having me, Sam. It's very exciting. I thought we were talking about a podcast today, so the fact that we're doing it is just the best. So I'm hoping we can bring lots of energy and get into some good chats.
Yeah, nice. Look, for the benefits of people watching, you just want to give a bit of an intro to yourself, your background, how and why you do what you do, and sort of what you're up to at the moment.
Perfect. My name's Zoé Kennedy. I am the recent founder and CEO of Spark & Co. So we're a staff-led inclusion organisation, really about empowering staff to share their lived experience with their organisation. I use she and her pronouns, and I have been employed in government and sort of semi-government, I guess, for nearly 20 years, and recently decided that it was time to make a change. I've been involved in staff networks for over 20 years. So if people don't know what that is, if you're in a workplace and you identify in a particular group. So I was really involved with women or gender networks and then LGBTIQA plus networks. But in our workplace where we were together, we also had Aboriginal staff networks, culturally and linguistically diverse, disability employee networks. So they're for groups of people who are underrepresented in the workplace. And generally, they start when people say, oh, something's not quite right, or we wish we could change something in our workplace. And it's just that collective, joining together and saying, what can we do? So my real passion is around empowering those networks, because when they are resourced and are doing what they need to do, the impact for the organisation is really strong. And we saw that in our last workplace when that went well, and having leaders who get it, and allowing people just to get on and do their thing. So for me, it was time to go out away from, there can be real limitations in working in government sometimes, and it's nice to walk away from those limitations and just kind of be outside of that for a little while. So really nice to be able to just talk from my view and bring all of that experience to assist other staff networks.
Yeah, definitely. So 20 years working largely in government.
Yep.
Always in the sort of D&I space?
Never, actually, until the last couple of years. So I was an administrative professional. Yep. I did finance as well. So I was kind of doing finance because I'd been a union delegate for years, which was where I started when I was working in hospitals. So that was a voluntary thing on top of my job. Yep. And through that, I learnt a lot about employee relations and industrial relations. And so my first job in New South Wales in government, I also gave advice around HR and employee relations. So I'd kind of used this experience that was not a usual way to bring in and offer that advice. So I was still an administrative finance HR person. Like I was a kind of, I don't know, like a dog's body kind of job, a bit of everything. And it wasn't until, but all the way through, I'd been involved in either establishing, leading, supporting staff networks. And all of that experience kind of added up to where finally, probably about 3 years ago, I got a job to lead a network of environmental regulators across Australasia. So the chair of that organisation, Alert, was located in the organisation I worked in at the time. And so I got employed to kind of go and run that network. And so there was a team of 2. I had a comms person with me. And so that was my first go at running a network as my profession. And then my kind of dream gig from there came where I got to start establish Pride in New South Wales. So that was...
Before you got there,
yes.
When I first, just to see if I'm on the right track, when I first met you, I was in the D&I space in DPE at that time. And the first time I met you, I think it was for Reconciliation Week event.
Right. Yep.
And at that time, I think you were at then maybe EPA.
EPA, yep.
and you were coordinating this event.
Yes.
I believe it was for Reconciliation Week. I might
Sounds
be
right.
wrong. And I was really impressed with your coordination and leadership in that space, and how you pulled that sort of event together. And I feel like I could really see the passion coming through in just, you can tell when people are working in this space if they get it, if they're about it, all that sort of stuff. And so was that a part of that
was
work?
not my job.
That's what I was going to say.
No.
Were you employed to do,
Nope.
because that's what we see in the network space, a lot of staff doing that work on
Correct.
top of.
Correct. So the bulk, until I did the Pride job started in March 2020, that was the first time I was employed in a inclusion space. First time. But that was my kind of inclusion space, in that it was starting a whole of sector staff network. So when you and I met, I had a day job at the time I was running a small team in a branch, like a kind of a, what would you call it, like a coordination space. So I would deal with the ministerials and look after that kind of thing for the director. And on top of that, I was involved with the Rainbow Connection, but I was also the head of our Inclusion and Diversity Committee at the EPA. So I went to the executive a couple of years before that and said, we've got a real gap. We're not doing anything in EPA, and we didn't have a really strong connection to the department. And so I went to the executive and said, I'd really like to start a staff-led committee. And they said, go away, work out what it's going to look like and bring it back as a proposal. And I did, and we got it up. So we built, and we just hit it at a time. It was the most amazing thing. We actually got put in as a subcommittee of their executive. So we were delegated the responsibility to lead the conversation around inclusion from a staff-led perspective.
Fantastic.
So it was this kind of ultimate mix where the executive really backed us in and said, we want to know and we had a really diverse bunch of people. So we had minimums in terms of representation of underrepresented people in the group, but we also wanted to represent all the different branches in the organisation and all different regions in the organisation. So I was doing that all on top of a full-time day job. So that when you and I met, we didn't have any diversity and inclusion people in the EPA at that time. We just needed to step up as staff and say, we really want to do this.
And it's not uncommon, is it, in
No.
the D&I space?
It's not at all.
There's not those resources there.
And
underrepresented people end up taking on
exactly
more work just to try and address or bring awareness to or drive change.
Exactly. And we were lucky because we had that, we were empowered to do it. So each of us that got involved were supported by our then managers to, we could put a bit of time into it. So there was definitely our own time, but we also could use a bit of work time, and we could use our work resources to kind of just be in contact with people and coordinate events and things. And one of the most incredible events I've ever been involved in, we ran an event, like a panel up in Armidale. We said we wanted to go regional, and we wanted to do something around mental health. And that one conversation on that one day, our whole executive came along up to Armidale as well. So our local colleagues got to interact with the executive, and our committee, our staff-led committee and the executive had dinner together so they could all get to know each other. But the conversation on the day where two of our colleagues stood up and talked about their own experience, which they'd never discussed at work, really. One of them definitely never, completely came out about these experiences and issues that they had, and absolutely shifted the conversation in our workplace. Where people were able to then go and have conversations with their leaders about their own mental health or caring for someone with issues around mental health. So that was a staff-led initiative. We arranged it all. We got, we did everything we needed to do. We got a little bit of money to do something, and it made a significant impact.
All on top of your
correct
actual
day jobs.
Yep. Amazing.
And there was a committee of us, but with any volunteer group, some people have different capacity at different times.
Totally.
So some people, and some people will naturally take on a lot more.
Yep.
I'm one of those. Like, I can't really let it fall.
Yep.
I want to be a part of it. So
you very much build up a reputation very quickly because, at that time where we were, it was a large cluster, still is, and you were outside. We were based centrally, and you were outside of that within where you were working. But you very much built up a reputation quickly as a leader, as someone who was, pushing really hard to work in this space and make some progress. And it's so amazing that you still had that reputation, but that was on top of, I mean, it's not surprising because I know that that's quite common.
Yep.
But to be able to still have that reputation across such a large cluster of championing and driving, solutions and change and progress, to still be doing that on top of your day job is pretty great.
It was pretty cool. I think because of a couple of really good leaders who got it at the EPA when we started, that feeling empowered to go and have those conversations and to be brave enough to push the boundaries, because some of what I was suggesting was definitely pushing the boundaries. There was people that didn't want some of the stuff I was doing to be what was happening in the organisation.
Yeah, totally.
So, we were very lucky to have a group of leaders that, for our organisation, were comfortable with us pushing those barriers.
Totally.
And they saw a lot of change in that organisation. A few years before that period, I'd actually been on our spokeswomen's network. So it was a women's. It had started in 1977 when the Anti-Discrimination Act in New South Wales came about. And apparently the government at the time mandated that every agency would have to have one of these spokeswomen's networks.
Okay.
And they were mandatory until the early 2000s. The one in our old workplace is currently the only one still standing that has been going that entire 40 odd years. So that's been, when I joined that, it had such a solid base. People knew who it was. So when you said you're a spokeswoman, people knew what that meant.
Yeah.
And so you had this kind of platform, and I just ran with it, and that for me, I think what I like talking to people about in networks who are network members is there is ways that you won't even realize it, but you're building a reputation. Totally. You're building, you'll be getting things done, and then all of a sudden more people know who you are. Definitely. And that definitely opened up opportunities for me.
Is that how you ended up going and doing the whole of government?
I would definitely say that had an impact, because what it meant was by the time we got to that point, I felt incredibly empowered by the people directly around me and my leaders to go for it. If you think that that's lacking in our workplace, I give you the okay to go ahead and do something. And it was when our new secretary at the time came in, so Jim Betts started. And
he's coming on the podcast, by the way.
Fantastic. Excellent. When he started, I reached out. I don't know if you have any memory of it. He used to do the bulletins.
Yep.
His very first bulletin that he wrote, it was like, it really hit me.
Yeah. That was why I came back from secondment.
There you go.
I thought, okay, there's something going on here.
Exactly. Yeah. And I responded to, because he invited us to respond, say g'day. Yep. And so I responded and I said something like, if you are half of what you're promising, I can't wait to work with you. But also he used the term sexual orientation in context of why people will get discriminated against in a workplace and what he wouldn't accept. Whereas I'd never even seen a leader use those words. Let alone not just in the context of the law. Yep. He'd quoted it in terms of, a community societal thing. And I responded to him basically and said, my colleague Bradford and I lead the Rainbow Connection, which is still their LGBTIQA plus staff network. Yep. And, when you're settled in, send us your PA's, your EA's number, we'll get in touch and we'd love to chat with you. And he rang me that night and said, can you make it in tomorrow? I really want to speak to you. Yeah, wow. And we said, oh, yeah. Yeah, we can. And so we talked to him through... So we'd had a really interesting journey with the Rainbow Connection. We really wanted to be known as the network for queer people in the workplace, and we had a lot of pushback prior to Jim being there. And we basically kind of went stealth. We had to go underground, and thankfully had the support of a couple of other leaders, and we just launched ourselves, and that was really difficult. We were pushed away a lot, which didn't make any sense to us, but we thought, well, that's what's happened.
How do you navigate that when you're within a workplace and you're trying to drive something like that, because you know it's so critical to work health and safety, employee well-being, belonging, everything, and you in an environment where you know that there's people that don't push back on, don't support it.
I cried a lot because it's personal.
Of course.
Like when we're involved in these networks, it's about our identity.
Totally.
It's who we are. So, gosh, I remember standing. We used to be in an office on Goulburn Street, and I must have, something awful had happened around not being supported, and I lost it. And I remember I just went walking. I ended up on that street near the big theatre behind Goulburn Street, and I was talking to a friend going, I don't know how to get past this. Like, we're in a workplace, it's 2017 or 18 or 19 or whatever it was. I don't understand how this is happening. What can I do? Because, I don't want to get the sack. If I keep pushing, maybe that's where I'm heading. So it just became the Rainbow Connection, just because we'd kind of had to go underground to build, just became a family, a really strong unit. And those people will always be my friends because we got this opportunity to build something where we weren't welcomed in with open arms at the beginning.
Totally.
So the people, even our members that were around early on, got this real sense of something bigger than just a staff network who will hold morning teas. Totally. It was really about we needed to build a community where we could all feel safe.
Definitely.
We could be ourselves. We could connect. So I think we did it by, lifting each other up and just being really brave and saying, we know that this is the right thing to do. Like, they're going to be on the wrong side of history, not us.
Totally.
And, we'd go in and try and negotiate really hard to get some changes to things that were so simple to fix, but just couldn't get anywhere. And honestly, the difference came when Jim walked in that door. When we got that conversation with him and he said, look, we've tried to negotiate, we've got a list of things. He said, go and check your list with your members, make sure you're comfy. I want you to bring it back to me. And we also told him that we'd started to reach out to other pride networks around government because we really wanted to connect with them.
Totally.
Because if we were doing really well with events, we were struggling with policy and stuff because we had this block. We were struggling with comms because we had a block. So we wanted to talk to the other networks who were doing really well in that space. Okay, well, what about if you come to our events and you manage the comms? We'll share those resources. Like, why would we all build it all on our own? And so we're talking to Jim about that, and he said, why don't we get you in front of the Secretary's Board? Like, this is a great idea. We should make something of this.
Yeah, wow.
Like, okay. And so first thing we did was take our list, checked it with our colleagues, and we also then went back to the group, cross-sector group, and we went back and saw him a couple of weeks later, and he had the list in front of him of what we wanted, and it just had ticks next to all of it. He's like, yeah, done. Like, what's next? I said, well, that's lovely that you're saying done. That's amazing. But if I take that to the person who's supposed to do that thing, they're not going to do it because they're not doing it for me. And so we had to have this whole conversation about where our barriers were and how he could help us lift them. And that's what he is amazing at, lifting those barriers.
Did you have to present the Secretary's Board?
Yes.
What was that like? So I had to do that as well when I was working on a whole of government piece. And it's it can be a confronting process, right?
Absolutely. It was confronting. It was nerve-wracking, but it was so exciting. Bradford and I were lucky enough to be the ones that got to go on that day. And I remember it was out at Westmead, and they had like this prototype hospital room. And so we were kind of hanging out there, and we just kept getting bumped to the end of the meeting. And we were given half an hour, and we ended up down with 10 minutes. And when we walked in the door, Tim Reardon, the then head of the public sector, he's like, okay, we've not got much time, like, just get into it. We've read everything, what do we really need to know? And we had practiced and rehearsed, like, we had it. And we're like, oh, what do we have to bring that down by about, we have to do about a sixth of what we had. Oh, how are we going to do it? And we had a couple of stories that were really, really harrowing about people's experience that we knew would hit home.
Yep.
And we had most of the room in tears.
Yeah, okay.
Telling them this is what's happening in modern day New South Wales public sector workplaces.
Yep.
We need to do something about it.
Totally. These are your people, these are your staff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. You have a responsibility.
Totally.
And they all just went, what?
Yeah.
What do you mean? At specific ones where they go, has that been fixed? Like, have we done? Yes, we've done something about it, but we're all doing it as volunteers.
Yeah.
We need to bring that group together at the very least.
Totally.
And so our proposal, which we'd kind of worked up what we wanted it to look like, was a whole of sector staff network. We wanted an advisory committee to the Secretary's Board, an LGBTIQA plus advisory committee, and we pitched for 2 staff to establish it.
Yep. And
they just said yes.
Yeah, great.
We're like, oh.
It's it's amazing, isn't it, the power of storytelling?
Yes.
And that's something similar sort of experience at that Secretary's Board meeting, like up to the end.
Yep.
Time's been cut back. Big prezzo ready to go. Fuck, I've got to cut. What do I do now? So press play on the case study that we pulled together, and that was our, couple of minutes, and then quick pitch. Yep. And luckily we got the outcome we were seeking, but it was a big learning for me in terms of that level, right? Like our leaders and decision makers have teams of experts that are doing the grunt work. They need to be able to connect to the impact.
Correct.
The emotion and the value that this has for our communities and stuff like that.
Exactly.
So it's really reaffirming to hear that that's what was,
exactly what worked for you worked for us.
Yeah.
We did exactly the same thing. We had our stories. I think we had a bit of data just because, we wanted to add to the story, and then it was boom, this is how we know we can have an impact if you empower us to do this thing. And it's coming up to its 2nd birthday, Pride in New South Wales. So it took us from when we went in to when we launched, it was about 9 months. I was very lucky to get the first go at doing the job that led it. So I was a principal advisor on that, and dream job.
Yeah.
Because like I was saying before, it was the first time I'd been employed to work in the space instead of it being something I did on top of my day job.
Totally.
And I was really grateful that I'd just come from a couple of years running a different kind of network.
Yep.
So I'd built all different kinds of skills and really great connections. And it was an amazing, amazing year. I think I was in the job maybe 2 or 3 months and we launched.
Yeah.
And,
we launched within 2 to 3 months.
Yeah.
That's pretty quick
for
a whole of government project. Sector project.
Yep. And I guess we were lucky that we were building something, we were just getting the first bones because we wanted the people to come in and talk about what they wanted.
Yeah.
So, it was kind of different to a big other kind of project.
Yep.
This was open the doors and, build a little platform for people to come and stand on together.
Definitely. That
was kind of our job at the beginning.
Did you uncover any parts of the whole of government where these networks were non-existent?
Yes. Yeah. Many.
Yeah. More so than not?
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And what was kind of in, I guess, my heart was driving what we were doing and why I was just unrelentless in making sure we stuck to what we had originally pitched was about that, where there's a person in an agency that maybe isn't connected to their big department staff network, like they're really separated for whatever reason. They might be regionally located. There's this individual going, like the old Little Britain saying, like, am I the only gay in the village?
Yeah, totally.
And feeling completely alone and isolated. For me, Pride in New South Wales was a place where all of us as individuals could come together and find our tribe, find our people, our community, and build that together.
Totally.
And the amount of conversations I had with individuals that just said to me things like, I've been in the public service for 20 years and I've never, ever until now felt confident and comfortable to come out.
Yep.
And now I can.
Totally.
Right? And just goosebumps all day because this thing that you knew that this was what would happen, but to hear that it actually happened, phenomenal.
Amazing.
Phenomenal. Like speaking with an incredible trans woman in regional New South Wales saying, I've never met another trans person in the sector. Like I'm, like,
great.
am I it sort of thing? Like
totally.
you are absolutely not it.
100%.
Here's a few people I'm going to connect you with.
Awesome.
By the time, a couple of years later, they are now leading work in the whole sector around getting a gender affirmation policy up and running.
So good.
Like from feeling completely isolated to leading the work.
Yeah. Game changer.
Absolute game changer. Yeah. Because we stuck to our guns and said, we know we are the people with lived experience. We know what works for us.
Totally.
Let us show you what that is.
Totally.
Yeah.
How did you deal with the challenges along that way in that journey? Because I know, like, for myself in the Aboriginal affairs space, the network space, we're still constantly dealing with, 2 steps forward, 1 step back all the time. And I remember where in our space, there was all in our spaces in where we had been working. It was amazing to watch the transformation in terms of employee safety, in terms of people feeling safe. And I noticed that's particularly through like our communication platforms. And there was a lot more people comfortable to just be who they were, no matter what their identity was, right? But there were instances where that, wasn't safe. And so it really reaffirms that no matter the progress that we make, we still have to navigate these, realities along that journey to progress.
Absolutely.
What's that like, and how do you keep moving forward and keep people safe as well? Like, what is it like in that space?
Challenging.
Yeah.
Really challenging. And for me, it was about keeping lots of energy around it. Like I'm generally a really positive person. And kind of am known for being, full of colour and bounce. And so trying to, have that as much as I can all of the time, but also really remembering that the reason we built this is we wanted to build this community. So the community formed pretty quick because that was what everyone needed. We just needed that space to be with our people,
Yeah.
And I've seen this in all the spaces where networks have been really strong.
Definitely.
And so every time you are doing the 2 steps forward, 1 step back, you have your community to keep coming back to for that strength.
Yeah. Okay.
So I think for me, because I definitely faced challenges as an individual, like challenges to my values around what I knew needed to happen or what we had committed to our community to do. And I think, again, as an individual, when it's connected to your identity, you know what it's like there can be a lot of emotional toil around working in a space which reflects your identity.
Totally.
And, you're often asked to tell your story and most days for me, I feel safe enough to do that.
Yeah.
But I'm also in a very privileged position to feel safe enough to do that.
Yeah.
So I think for me as well, what drove me to pass those challenges was wanting to make it safe for as many other people as I possibly could, because people shouldn't just be hearing my voice.
Definitely.
I'm a white queer woman, cisgender woman. That's one perspective. I have different other experiences that impact that. I have my own experience of mental health. I've survived 2 violent relationships. Like there's different intersections of that.
Totally.
But at the end of the day, that's I have a lot of privilege around my experience.
Totally.
So being able to create a platform, I think the energy of knowing that every step that we were taking, even when we were going backwards, was helping to build that platform for other people.
Yeah.
That kind of, I guess, drove me enough to get me through, but also very, incredibly strong partner.
Yep.
Who, if it wasn't for them supporting everything I did, none of all of that would have ever happened.
Yeah.
Everyone saw them as the person who turns up and makes the rainbow cake, which is amazing.
Yep.
But don't see that in the background when I'm falling apart at 11:30 or 1:30 the night before, freaking out that I haven't done enough. They're the one picking up the pieces, making sure I'm okay, and then I've got all the energy the next day.
Definitely.
So those other people around us who allow us to be those leaders out the front. Because I think what I've also realised over the years is I'm really comfortable talking. I'm comfortable being out the front, and I don't always need to be or want to be. But if there's a point where my peers, my colleagues, my community at that particular time say, yep, can you take this one? Then I feel glad that I've got that confidence to do that.
Yeah.
But then finding ways to empower other people into that, but also not forcing.
Yep.
You know, like
Definitely.
we ask people to tell their stories. How do we do that in a safe way?
Very important.
Yep.
Critical.
Yep.
Because we often see, coming back to touching on the storytelling stuff at the secretary's board level,
Yep.
there's a fine balance too between like, how do you tell someone's story and do no harm?
Yes.
You know, how do you tell a story with integrity?
Yep.
And how can it be an empowering process? You know, like not we use the term poverty porn.
Yep.
You know,
Yep.
we're very careful with how we curate our people's stories
Yep.
at impact policy in any work that we do, because we've seen it time and time again where those, you know, people have been, you know, and sometimes unintentionally most of the time as well.
Absolutely.
You know, but they're critical principles. Coming back to what you were talking about when you mentioned your awesome partner and and the support you get from them.
Yep.
What do you do for self-care? Like that's something critical for me that I had to find when I moved into government, trying to manage burnout and all that sort of stuff, and being really strict around prioritizing self-care and doing it without feeling guilty, and that it's a critical part to maintain this work that we do that has more of a emotional toll on us than what you probably started out with
My
in
day
your
jobs.
career doing. Yeah. When you're an admin officer or whatever it was you were doing.
Yep.
What does self-care look like for you?
The ocean.
Yep.
Absolutely. But I'm not always great at, like for me, I'm really good at telling other people, find your joy, you know, you have to always do it, but not so great at always managing it for myself.
Yep.
So for me, sometimes, you know, my mental health will really dip and then I have to do something about it. So unfortunately, I'm not always great at that side. But for me, when I'm feeling, if I can catch it quickly enough that I don't dip, for me, it's like, right, get your body in the ocean. Like if it's the harbour or the, you know, we're so lucky where we live. I can drive 15 minutes. I can jump on my motorbike. I can feel free on the bike and then get into the ocean and come back. For me, that's a huge thing. Spending time with my partner makes a big difference. You know, her and I have a really lovely, easy life. We're very lucky we get to live in a really fabulous place like Redfern. Back in the day when I started doing all this stuff, I was playing footy. If I could still be playing, if my body would still let me play footy, best self-care ever. You know, like actually really very good for my mental health and physical health, because that kind of aggression and controlled aggression of the physicality of the game was so good for me. Because I'd, you know, go and get flogged at training. I was 20 years older than most of my teammates, or at least 10 or 15. But so I'd always be down the back, but I'd finish and I'd play the game. And I was a shit footy player, but I loved it. And it was just that sense of being able to, you know, you can go in and you can hit someone. You know, you're not going to hurt anyone. And that was really good for me. I used to, and I really need to get back to this, I used to sing in choirs. And so that's a similar feeling to that really physical sport, is the kind of, is singing. You've
got to join this community choir in Redfern. And it's run by a good mate of mine, and he has a 78er.
Really?
And his name's Shane Brown. Shout out to Shane Brown if he's listening. And he's invited us down before, but I'm not a singer. I'm not going.
Everyone's a singer, Sam.
Everyone's a singer, somewhere. But I'll link you up.
Fabulous.
It's in your community.
I didn't even know there was one. Amazing.
Yeah, he's been doing it for a few years now. I think maybe it obviously had a bit of a pause with COVID and stuff. Yeah, there you go. Back on the deck with singing.
There you go.
All right.
Because I can't play footy. Too old for that. But yeah, so I think for me, like getting on the motorbike, like that sense of freedom, and I think that the ocean is the similar for me. But then it's also about touching base with my people. You know, like making sure, like giving my mum a call, and you know, my mum's an absolute legend, and so I can talk to her about all of my work stuff and have a place that I can just completely be myself. And so having a few really good people in my life that's probably for me. I need to talk it through. Surprising, I know,
Yeah.
but I'm not quiet in a corner.
Yeah.
I need to kind of be interacting with people to get my energy back.
Definitely.
Yeah.
How did you survive when you first came into the public sector? Because when I first came into government, I'd worked in the community space for 10 odd years. I came into government, I was working in Aboriginal affairs, and it was just a whole new world of working. And we didn't have a staff network, and I was so out of my depth in the role that I was in. And to be honest, in the first 4 weeks, I put in my resignation.
Wow.
And I was going to quit, and it was just because of chance that this opportunity came up, and I went and worked on a special project that really brought out some of the strengths that I had.
Yep.
But in the role that I was in, I was completely, square peg in a round hole.
Yep.
And I remember saying at the time, like, I really wish that I had a mentor or someone that could help me navigate this space.
Find my people.
Yeah.
Yep.
And there wasn't a massive amount of Aboriginal staff in the head office, to be honest. Probably about 50%. Surprisingly, Aboriginal affairs only got around 50% Aboriginal staff. More in the regions.
Okay.
Percentage is higher in the regions, but in like central office and that. So it wasn't a massive amount, and didn't have that structural network sort of support. So I often reflect around those first days and think, if luckily that opportunity hadn't come up for me, probably would have gone back to not-for-profit sector or whatever, which is awesome too. But like, how did you navigate that space? Coming from who you are, what you're about, and you started that journey. How did you navigate it? How did you get through it? Did you have to find stuff informally? Like, what did it look like?
Yeah, really good question, actually. And interestingly, I'd come from working in a Catholic healthcare service before that, which had its own challenges. Interestingly, I became really close friends with the head of the convent. So the sister who led the convent, which was still on site where we worked.
Yeah, okay.
Her and I became this unlikely friendship, the really radical, what they would have deemed radical out lesbian union delegate at work, and the head of the convent. And she was in her 70s and I was probably in my 20s. Yeah. And we just clicked. She's an amazing feminist, and I learnt incredible things from her and the other sisters about living your values. Yeah. And so being in a space where I'm not anything close to resembling Catholic, but found a place that organisation was absolutely values driven, because it had started with the sisters, and they were all about creating healthcare for people who couldn't access it otherwise back in the early 1900s in Brisbane. And, they'd done incredible things through the AIDS epidemic. They never saw anyone away. And so I think that was a really good start for me to, when I came into government, really just having to keep coming back to what are my values. I, like you, I was kind of at first going, is this going to work for me? I felt comfortable in my job, which I think was useful. It was aligned with my skills kind of thing. I had a really, really great boss who, he made me feel very comfortable, very confident. Bring your skills with you. We want to see the different things.
And bring yourself to work.
Bring yourself. Yeah. And within 3 months of working at the EPA, I was on the spokeswoman's network. Yeah. He encouraged me to go and be a part of that. And that was a big commitment of time.
Totally.
So I think for me, probably the challenges got more obvious as time went on. At first, I don't think I was really aware of them. Once I started become active in staff networks, I probably started to see a few more challenges, because you're sometimes pushing against what the organisation wants to do, or you're asking it to do better for your cohort, or for all of the cohorts of underrepresented people. Definitely. Really, because anything you can do in terms of gender, disability, Aboriginal space, anything you can do in any of those spaces will help everyone else. So I think for me, the challenges were managed again by, the being a part of a community, feeling empowered to do what I was doing, and feeling valued for bringing that energy to it. It was only later on, and I think that probably had a big part of why I decided to go out on my own, was I could see a limit to where I could push.
Definitely.
And I don't want a limit on where I can push.
I was going to say, that's a good segue too, is you touched on your values personally at that time. And I'd love to hear about your values in terms of Spark & Co. And what that looks like. And a bit of a reflection in that sort of space too, and how that feels you.
I think for me, courage and bravery are probably at the forefront in that I want, and empowerment. So it's about empowering in going into an organisation, hopefully, and working with staff to show them what, if they get together and kind of do these particular things, then, and they are empowered by the organisation around them, and I can help do that as well, then they will see impact for their community within the organisation. So I think that's a big one for me. And I think that authenticity, I don't have any requirement anymore to pretend that I'm something I'm not.
Definitely.
I'm big enough and ugly enough now to be completely myself, and to be really proud of who I am. I am a proud queer woman. I am proud of having a fat body. I am proud of being, growing up in Queensland and going for Queensland in the state of origin.
Look, let's just cut
Stop
you
it
there, mate.
I know that's going to be edited. It's fine.
Cut that out.
But I think that building that pride in people, and when you will have seen this in work you do as well, when you see people, when they come together and they build something and see an impact from it, like that internal pride gives people enough power and energy to go on and do whatever that next thing is, and you just step out of the way. Now,
so you're very, very much seen and respected as, I would say, an expert in the staff network space, particularly from the work that you've done already in the LGBTQIA+ space. But a lot of that learning, frameworks, systems thinking is applicable across the whole D&I space.
Correct.
And you and I did a little bit of work before I went out and kicked off Impact Policy around some work in the Aboriginal Affairs network space. I think you might have been doing some stuff in some other network space, more of a general network review process. And I remember the work that we did in that space briefly was about sort of looking at, we had an established network that had been there for a long period of time, been through a lot of change as an agency, in some parts functioning really well, in some parts room for improvement. And we talked a lot about how do you manage a process like this? How do you look at that? But do you want to just maybe reflect on, I guess, the value that you bring from Spark & Co. in terms of the employee-led network space that is applicable across the whole of the D&I sort of space? Because one thing I found is, as an Aboriginal person working in the Aboriginal policy space, a lot of my knowledge and thinking and skills is applicable across a whole range of different areas, but 9 times out of 10 people only want to talk to me about an Aboriginal project.
Correct.
But you have so much value to add in the D&I space across the board. You may specialize in that space as an expert. How would you discuss, explain, help anyone that's sort of watching or trying to understand this space, understand that? Because it's sort of, it can be problematic in a way too, right? People sort of typecast us as
pigeonholed.
Pigeonholed, you only go to Zoe if you want to do stuff in
rainbow stuff.
Rainbow stuff. Sam, blank space, that's it. Whereas, so how do you juggle it?
I had to be really conscious when I was, building Spark & Co. that it wasn't just seen as a rainbow space. I love rainbows. I think rainbows is my favourite colour. So I wanted everything to be rainbows, and my very smart partner said, do you think that, lots of heads of organisations who are going to be employing you might be, slightly older, probably very white, cisgendered men? Will they want to be talking about the sparkly rainbow lady coming in to see them? Or will they want something a bit more not generic, but yeah, that goes across more things.
Yep.
So I had to be very conscious of the fact that that's not just my space.
Yeah.
And in fact, I would say my last year, and that review that you're talking about, that was a review with all of our staff networks. And I would say the most time I spent was with our disability network and with our culturally and linguistically diverse network. And unfortunately, it didn't kind of work out that way, but I'd started to do some work with both of the big Aboriginal networks as well.
Yep.
So the things that I have learnt from all of that time, building, leading and supporting staff networks apply to any network. But for me, the main thing is I have to be able to go in and build rapport.
Yeah.
People I'm walking in to support and empower, they're not going to let me do that until they trust that I'm there to support them.
Totally.
I'm not there because when you're in a staff network, and this was a really challenging thing in my last role, when you're in a staff network, you often feel like you're up against the D&I team or the HR team because you're trying to push to get things shifted, and this group has their own KPIs and things they have to meet, and they're wanting you to help meet those. So there's constantly, so I've been in situations where it hasn't worked and it's been really hard work, and I've been in situations where that works really well and you see greater impact. So for me, being able to explain with Spark & Co is basically everything I'm talking about it's about staff-led inclusion. It doesn't matter which space it's in, but I also have now created a network of colleagues like yourself who I can say, hey, do you want to come and work together with me because I'm going into a space, I'm working with an Aboriginal community or with a network, and I need to be able to, I can't understand from their perspective, their lived experience.
Totally.
I can relate it from mine, and we can find the commonality of being in a underrepresented group.
Definitely.
But having a partnership with different individuals that I've worked with over the years that can kind of bring all of those other groups together, like those intersections.
Definitely.
So I think but sometimes a group won't need or want that. But if they do, to help them feel more comfortable, then that's what I would want to bring in as well.
Definitely.
So
I think it's a critical way of working, right? Because I know we've talked a little bit about it. It is around intersectionality. And even like a couple of years ago when I was in the D&I space, it was coming up, people were talking about it. But even people in the D&I space at that time were sort of, going through their own process of understanding that the theory, or I'm not even going to call it a theory because it's not a theory. It's a reality, right?
It's a legal theory though, like the actual word. Yeah.
And I think that way of working in terms of collaboration and bringing people in, no matter what work you're doing, it almost like reaffirms that as a standard way of operating. Absolutely. Right? Like if you're working in the LGBTQIA plus space, you could almost guarantee that there's going to be people from a whole range of backgrounds that are in that part of that community. So you're only adding value by being able to bring in,
other people,
a team of people that work alongside you, whether it's that space, my space, whoever's space.
Exactly. And I think for me, the biggest thing with Spark is me being able to be really upfront about what my lived experience is. Like I'm really an open book. But so this is what the lived experience that I bring, but now what I can sort of wrap around that lived experience is the skills to bring any staff-led network along a journey to have more impact. Like that's what I've learnt how to do. They're the skills, the resources I've built. That's about saying I can work with any staff network and bring them along and have them see bigger impacts.
Totally.
I can bring my lived experience, and if we need to, we'll bring in other lived experience. But it's also about empowering the group to share their stories, because that's where the power lies, and that's where the impact will happen from.
Totally.
Yeah.
I think that's such a powerful offering for Spark & Co to be able to bring that way of thinking, that way of leading and doing. It's exciting times.
It is exciting times.
And I guess sort of coming towards the end of our time together, and I feel like it's been so nice to sit and talk about this space again, because I haven't worked in this space for a minute. So it's nice to sit and have that connection and reflection and just really reaffirm how important this work is for our people, for our way of working, for organisations and systems in general. Moving towards the end, is there any sort of stuff that I guess gets you really sort of curious or excited at the moment when you're thinking about the future for Spark & Co?
Oh, good question. Excited just because it's brand new is where can it go?
Yeah.
I want to bring together staff network members and leaders from all kinds of organisations, like from not-for-profits, from big corporates to government. I want to bring them together to really learn from each other because, like we started out before we built Pride in New South Wales, it's really about saying, they are all doing it on top of their jobs.
Totally.
So let's minimise what you actually have to do by everyone doing a part and just putting it all in the pot and sharing the rest.
Yeah, definitely.
So that's exciting to me, that there might be opportunities to make that sort of thing happen. And I guess I'm also then curious of how I get to work with colleagues like you.
Yeah.
How do we cross over? Because, you are a missing piece of the D&I space. Like you were in it and you made a real impact when you were in it. So, bringing you back into that world a little bit and going, okay, well, when I was talking to you before, it was staff networks. Imagine being able to bring somebody in like yourself with all of this experience around building good policy and delivering, a masterclass to a group of staff network members about how to really interrogate policy to make sure that it's equitable and that they're getting out of it what's going to really change their employee experience.
Definitely.
Like being able to do that, that's what I'm curious about, is how can we all work together to continue to make that impact even bigger?
Yeah, beautiful. And so just in wrapping up, I think that's really exciting. I can't wait to get you back on later on down the track and hear more about where Spark's at. Any sort of final thoughts? And I'd also love to hear a suggestion of someone that you think would be great to sit in your chair and have a yarn to us as well. Whether they're in the D&I space, whatever space it might be. But yeah, any final thoughts? Any final people?
So person, there's a couple that I think of.
Yeah.
Someone we were talking about earlier, actually, Lavina Phillips.
Yeah.
She came in, we did an International Women's Day panel together once, and her perspective from, playing footy in Redfern and then ending up playing for Australia and being, a local Redfern girl, come up through the footy ranks there before it was really, the people who made the team up till about then were still, they're all paying for themselves and we're all doing all of this stuff. Her capacity to build a community around her without even noticing is pretty amazing.
Yeah, okay.
And so I think she'd be a really interesting conversation for you. The other person I think of actually is Ginny Jane Smith, who's involved with Black Aboriginal Corporation.
Yep.
And she does incredible work around for Black queer women and Black queer people as well. And she's done lots of really interesting jobs along the way. She's a fantastic role model for young Aboriginal lesbians, and she's a mum, and she's just really good value. And I think finally, it's exciting. I'm glad that we're doing this at a similar time, and that we can sort of support each other and touch base and hopefully just create a community of our own that we can, there's a few of us doing similar things. We can, support each other along the way. And like we said, if we go broke trying, well, we've given it a go.
Yeah, at least we did it doing something we love, right?
Yeah, 100%. Exactly. And if not, if it all goes great, then, we'll see you in a year and we'll be celebrating.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. All right. Well, thank you.
Thanks,
Sam.
Amazing.
Cool. All right.